placing a lollipop stick into the center of some PVC pipe and then filling it with some hot glue. After letting it dry, we can cut off most of the lollipop stick and then drill in a couple of holes. Now we have a replacement. A screen window is a must, especially during the summer. Unfortunately, this screen isn't super easy to install. We can make a plastic tab like this one to help. Simply lift up this rubber spline using a flathead screwdriver and put our tab underneath and push everything down into the slot. Now we can install our screen from the inside. This nozzle is cut a little too small to apply our sealant quickly. Let's modify the nozzle. First we'll melt the tip and seal it shut. Then we'll make a vertical incision along the nozzle. Now we can apply a much thicker layer faster. And once we're finished, we can seal everything up with a bit of duct tape. We don't want the raw wood to be exposed on our baseboards, so we'll cut everything to look a little bit more professional. We can cut clean 45-degree angles to the baseboard on both ends. Now we can line up the ends to form a neat angle. Tape the two ends together, then flip it over and add a piece of double-sided tape. This will keep our end piece secure. Sometimes we need a small foam brush to paint our projects. We can make one by hot gluing a pencil to a binder clip and then cutting off a piece of sponge for the brush head. Apply the paint like so. When finished, replace the old sponge with a new one. Here we're tying a prusik hitch, also known as a prusik knot. It's a rather useful knot because it's simple to tie and simple to untie. It stays secure under tension and it moves freely when not under tension. Besides being used in rock climbing, it's especially useful for tying rope to fixed posts. Now we're going to be joining these two beams together in a relatively simple way. We'll make some marks to match the width of the crossbeam and make another mark halfway deep. Next, we'll remove this section by making multiple cuts into the wood with a saw. Now we can break off the remaining clips. Then we can smooth out the bottom of our cut with either a miter saw like so, or simply by using a chisel. Now we'll use two screws to make our marks into both pieces of the wood to drill holes for dowels. We can use a pencil to make it easier to see the indents. Drill holes on the indents and install the dowels. Next, we'll add two more dowels into the corners, ensuring that the hole that we drill is angled. This is called a pocket hole. Fill the hole with glue and hammer in the dowels. Next, we'll saw off the ends of the dowels that are sticking out. Let's move on to our next project, which will be adding a depth stop to our hand saw. Start by cutting out a rectangle piece of wood that's the length of the saw blade and cut it about half its width. Next, we want to cut out two notches that are the same width as the bolts we'll be using to attach the depth stop to the saw. It's easier if we drill holes first and then saw out the remainder of the notch. A little bit of sanding wouldn't hurt either. Place the wood onto the saw blade and then make two marks in each notch. The higher the better. Using a center punch, we can make sure our drill stays lined up. Drill the holes into the saw blade. Slide one bolt into each hole, then place our depth stop, and lastly add a washer and a wing nut to each bolt. Now we can adjust our depth stop to the height that we need. It seems like this clothespin is unable to pick up this nut, but we can make a little adjustment to turn the clothespin into a handy pair of tweezers. Remove the spring and flip the sticks inside out. Reattach the spring, and now our tweezers can pick up all sorts of little things. Here's a fun little party trick using matches and a syringe. First, take the syringe apart. Dispose of the needle properly. Take a box of matches and cut out the rough side of the matchbox. Roll the cutout around the tip of a match. Next, we'll wrap it multiple times using tape. It matches the width of the inside of the syringe. Place the match and the tape inside the syringe. Now, just slam the plunger down onto the table to ignite the match. Here we have a piece of ribbon that's cut. Instead of gluing it, we can tie it together using a simple overhand knot. Pass the second piece of ribbon around the knot like so. For our last project, we'll be making an adjustable wrench by welding together a few nuts and bolts. First, we'll secure a square tube in our vise and then weld a nut onto the end. We can grind down some of the rough edges using an angle grinder. Next, we'll put 2 nuts onto an extra long bolt, spaced about 2 inches apart. Secure one of the nuts near the end of the square tube with a clamp, and then weld both nuts onto the square tube. Now we need to make a fixed jaw, also known as the top of the clamp. To do that, we'll cut off a piece of scrap metal in the shape of an L. Now we'll weld this piece. Again, we'll grind off some of the rough edges with an angle grinder. Now we can use it just like a normal wrench when you don't happen to have the exact size wrench or socket for the job. Just twist the bolts according to the size that you need. It can even be used for abnormal shaped objects. This handle on this push broom doesn't fit. We can attach it by using a plastic bottle. Cut off the top of the plastic bottle and then fix it to the handle using some screws and a heat gun. Next, we'll screw the cap to the top of the brush head. Simply twist the 2 pieces together and it's good as new. Next, we'll be installing a door handle. First, we want to mark out the faceplate so that it sits. We can hold it in place by using screws. Use a utility knife to mark around the faceplate and then remove the screws and the latch assembly from the door. Use a chisel to remove the outer layer of wood, like so. Next, we'll use a spade drill bit that's equal to the width of the latch assembly, and we'll mark the depth of the latch assembly into the drill bit. Now we can drill multiple holes to make carving out this space quicker and easier. We can then remove the remainder of the wood . Now line up the latch assembly with the mortise to the side of the door and mark where the handle and the lock will go. Drill the appropriate size holes for both the handle and the lock. Hammer the latch assembly into place if necessary and drill the screws into the faceplate. Insert the spindle and attach the handles. Make sure that everything works like it should. Here's a quick way to sharpen knives. Twist 2 nuts onto a long bolt and tighten the bolt into the chuck. Fasten the drill into the vise and turn on the drill while passing the blade between the 2 nuts to sharpen the knife. Next, we'll be making a miter box using this aluminum C-channel frame. We'll make our marks using a construction square. one at 90 degrees and one at 45 degrees. Use a hacksaw to cut through the metal. Now we'll place the wood in the frame, and we can make even cuts with our handsaw. Here's one at 90, and here's one at 45. How about adding a depth stop to our handsaw? This will prevent us from cutting too deep. Add a long piece of rectangular scrap wood and apply some double-sided tape to the back. Next, we'll make our marks on the saw to the depth that we need. One mark on each end. Now we'll lay our depth stop just above our marks. Measure it one more time just to be sure. Now let's crack open some walnuts. Find a wide drill bit and drill a few holes into a piece of scrap wood, then lay another piece of scrap wood on top, and then hit it with a hammer. Pour everything out and our walnuts are peeled. Having a way to stabilize this angle grinder is a requirement for safety, so we'll need to make a holder. We'll mark out the circumference of the outer lip shield, but ultimately, the grinder will rest on the inner lip shield. We'll get the measurement of the inner lip shield and cut out a half circle like so. Now, we'll screw this holder to a piece of scrap wood, which we'll clamp to the table. Set the grinder in the holder and check if it's stable. If we need to cut the end of the baseboard square, we can do so by creating a quick saw guide with only right angles. Trim off the excess baseboard until it's square. When cutting with a jigsaw or even with a circular saw, cutting freehand will leave us with an uneven cut. We can use a speed square as a guide to make straight, even 90-degree cuts and 45-degree angle cuts. We need to change the sandpaper on our belt sander. Cut a long piece of sandpaper that matches the width of the belt sander. Now add some glue to one end and stick it to a piece of scrap wood. Now we can tear off some of the grit, leaving behind just the paper. Now we can add our super glue to the paper end and attach it back to the other end of the sandpaper. Slip on the new sandpaper and give it a try. The edges of this board aren't lined up. We can secure them to a piece of wood and run a router bit through them. Now our two boards should be flush. We can keep these hazelnut shells from flying everywhere by placing them inside of this wrench.